Oops. So I wanted to just put together a little motivational chat for you guys today. We're going to be talking about the idea of just showing up. And you guys have probably heard me talk about this a little bit before. Um, so, this idea is the idea of showing up even when you are not sure if something will work, or showing up enough to just do the work, even if you don't believe it will work. Okay, so if I have learned anything in life, you guys, showing up, the idea of just showing up is huge. I think sometimes in nutrition and fitness, we have all these goals and we're like, yes, let's go. But then life happens, and it's really easy to get off course and feel like we aren't making any progress. And we start to feel like we want to give up, or life gets busy. And it's really hard to stay the course. And so I think this also applies to other areas of life too. Um, so we've already talked a lot in this course about kind of the nuts and bolts and the do's and don'ts of, your fitness journey, how to get results, keep results. And I know that I do a whole lesson on mindset, but there's just so much to say about mindset. I feel like I could think about and talk about and work on my own mindset, um, all day long. And so I want to give an example of a time in my life when I realized that just showing up was what I needed to do. And I have used this to apply to so many situations since. And so in this situation, I had no idea what else to do but show up. I knew that showing up was the first step and what I needed to do in order to be successful. And so my husband and I had moved to New Orleans in 2010, and we had gotten involved in an inner city ministry. And that may not make sense as to why someone would do a crazy thing like that, especially because we ended up working with youth in the inner city. It was super awkward at times, but the reason why we were doing it was that at that point in our lives, it was, I can't really say anything other than it was a calling. It was just something that we knew that in that period of our lives, it was something that we needed to do. And so it turned out that the greatest need in that environment, in that ministry, was the youth. And so we started showing up on Tuesday nights to help with youth in the inner city. And so these kids were probably like ages 8 to 12, which, maturity level right about there, 8 to 12. But in terms of like what they had seen in life, my goodness, they had seen more in their little young lives through their little young eyes than I had seen at 26 years old, and that I still have seen probably in some situations at 43. So, all that said, my husband and I were both, kind of middle class from the country. We had no idea how to relate and nothing in common with these kids, right? So, needless to say, it was super awkward. So we showed up, we hung out, we did what the leader said to do. We led activities, lessons, we talked to the kids, played games. We didn't know really what to talk to them about, but we just put ourselves out there and we're super awkward. And After that first night, we did two things. We stayed in touch with our why. We knew why we were doing this was because, like I said, it was just something we felt a call and a purpose to help with in that point in our lives. And so the second thing we did was just show up. And so it didn't really get easier. We did build some relationships with these kids. So maybe it got a little bit easier, but it was never just this like totally natural thing, right? Um, but week after week, we continued to have little of knowing what we were to do, but we just showed up. And regardless of like, um, faith or anything like that, or beliefs, I had a deep sense at that point that that was what I needed to do. And when I accepted that, that was just the action, was to show up. And that took all of the rest of the pressure off, because I didn't really need to know everything about the process. I just needed to do what I needed to do that was in front of me right then. And so stay with me, because this is all going to tie back. Um, and and then I had to believe that there would be a result, which, eventually there was. So many of these kids came to experience safety, even if it was just for a couple of hours during that time that we were with them, they had a couple of hours of safety every week. Some of those kids came to faith, some had guidance and role models to help direct them and make more of their lives. We were definitely part of like a greater group of people who invested a lot of time and energy into these kids. And again, like, what in the world does this have to do with nutrition and fitness? I'm getting to it. Um, so to recap so far, there was a calling, right? There was something that we needed to do, an action, and there was a desired result, right? For something positive to happen in these kids' lives. And so I had to trust the process. And if I had not, then I would have just given up pretty quickly. I could not see the result as I was going. Some of the positive results, like, I couldn't see, until years later. Um, it was often hard to believe that a result would come, but by faith. Okay. And like, faith is something like outside of, just a spiritual concept, right? So faith is believing in what you can't see. So you could think of that as a spiritual thing, or just like believing that something's going to work, right? And so faith was what, propelled me to keep showing up week after week. And so, when it comes to an area that we want to see change in our lives, like our nutrition and fitness, or other areas, we have to have faith in the process, right? And if you don't believe it will work, then you're probably not going to do it and not going to get results. So, if I hadn't believed that, like, our showing up had a purpose, then, and that it was going to get the desired result, then I probably would have given up pretty quickly, because it was hard and uncomfortable. Um, and the second thing, if you don't believe that you can do it, you won't be able to. So just showing up, if you don't do that, you definitely won't get a result. And if you don't even try, you definitely are not going to get a result, right? Another example that I want to kind of relate to this scenario, a client that I met with yesterday. Um, this client is pretty new to me. We've had about 4 visits so far. And she has always struggled with overeating, some binge eating, some struggles with actually following through on like an eating plan, and just all of the actions needed to get to get more healthy, right? To get more fit, to lose some weight. um, and so we met about 2 weeks ago and had set up a plan for her to get through the next 2 weeks, because she had some complicated situations coming up. And so we kind of took some extra time to plan ahead. And so when we met yesterday, it turned out she said she hadn't really done any of the things we discussed. And I was kind of surprised, just because she seemed pretty excited about it when we met before. And so I started asking her some questions, because I wanted to understand why, and for her to understand why, because we can keep working on the same, like, trying to get the same actions out of ourselves. But if we don't understand why we're not following through, then we might have a pretty hard time getting to where we actually follow through, right? Um, and so the more we talked and the more questions that I asked her, um, it turns out that she had a pretty big limiting belief standing in the way of her progress. She It wasn't that she didn't believe it would work. That was kind of the first thing I asked her, like, do you think that if you make these changes and you follow the plan, that it will work? And she said, yeah, I really think it'll work. But what we finally realized after talking it through was that she just didn't think she could make the choice in that moment to, like, make the healthy choice. So, like, when faced with Oreos and pizza rolls, or a good healthy choice, right? She just felt like she could not make that choice. And so, of course, we talk through things like maybe not having so many options available, and some practical things like that. But um, I think it's super important to realize if there's a limiting belief stopping us from having progress. So if we don't think we can do it, we're not going to be able to do it. And so for her, what I suggested that she do, and what I've done for myself so many times, is if I find that I have something that I'm believing that's standing in the way of my progress, like, I need to change my belief. And so in that situation, it's maybe just like, every time you catch yourself saying, I can't do this, change it to, I can do this. And I've used that example for myself with things that I've struggled with in terms of like, I'll use my notes in my phone and I'll just write in there, like, if there's like, let's say, for example, that was mine. I can't, for me, it might be, I can't stop eating when I meet my calorie goal at night. Okay. Because I like snacking at night. So, this is just an example. I haven't actually done this, but for other situations I have, but I can't think of anything. So I'm going with this one. Okay, bear with me. So anyway, so I might put in my phone in a little note because I know it's always with me, right? Sadly, but true. Okay. And so it might say, I can make a healthy choice when I want to overeat at night, when I'm watching TV or whatever. And I can choose this other thing. And I know it sounds silly, but this has helped me so much in like larger things that I've struggled with, like insecurities and different things. And so I think it is super important, even in those little things too, of if we're not believing that we can do something, or if we are not believing that it's going to work, then we either need to find the process that we do think that will work, or we need to change our belief to believe that it will work. So to kind of summarize a little bit so far. So, first, determine the action that you need to do, and make sure you're showing up in that. And if you're not, ask yourself why, until you uncover why it may be that you're not changing that habit. Okay. Um, and then when you are able to figure that out, then hopefully you can put the steps in order so that you can see some progress in the area you're trying to see progress. So for example, if you're trying to stick to a calorie goal, in terms of not overeating, like, do you need to have more snacks, or do you believe that you can do it? Do you believe that it will work? And for example, if you need to eat more often, then do you believe that that will actually help you reach your goal of having more energy, and that it's worth the effort to plan ahead and make sure you have food on hand to eat more often, and to eat a little bit more so that you can have more energy, lose weight, or meet a physical or performance goal. So be clear on your why, check in on your beliefs, and make sure that they support the actions that you're trying to do. And change any beliefs that you need to so that they line up with what's actually true. And then just show up and follow the plan. And then when you're not sure, keep showing up and keep following the plan. Okay, that's all I got for you.